Welcome. My name is Jeffrey Summit. I'm the Rabbi and Neubauer Executive Director of Tufts Hillel. And Mr. Ayolon, Bill and Joyce Cummings, President Bacow, trustees, Hillel board, leadership, guests, and most especially our students at Tufts. It's so important that we could be here together this evening. Mr. Ayolon, we so deeply appreciate your traveling from Jerusalem to Medford to join us as our teacher here this evening at Tufts University. Why is it so important that we hear your story? Why is it so important that we learn and study the Holocaust? Now, we in the Jewish community have no corner on suffering, but perhaps our experience in the Holocaust, which touched many of our families, has given us a special responsibility to raise these larger issues. We believe that it's essential to present models of how men and women can and should act when confronted with racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, and violence. Now, for many years, Tufts Hillel has been involved in programming and educating about genocide, and we've worked together with many important partners on campus to explore the issues of racism and intolerance. For years, we sent interfaith groups of students to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and we recently sent an interfaith group to Berlin to look at how Germany is responding to the legacy of the Holocaust. This past summer, with Bill and Joyce Cummings' support, we sent an interfaith group of 20 students to the Agahozo Shalom Youth Village in Rwanda that was established by Ann Heyman and trustee Seth Marin to work with orphans of the Rwandan genocide. As many here know, Bill and Joyce were so moved by listening to Mr. Ayolon that initial connection grew into a friendship, and they decided not only to bring Mr. Ayolon here to Tufts, but to put forth the Cummings Challenge to establish a program in genocide and Holocaust education on our campus. When we complete this challenge, we'll be able to continue and deepen this work, not only to understand the impact of the Holocaust and contemporary genocides, but to motivate our students to be actively committed to raising a moral voice and being engaged to stand up to persecution. We want to sandpaper our students' sensitivity so that they'll be among the first to recognize and respond to injustice in society. For our students here, there'll come a time in your lifetime when people will not be able to meet and hear survivors of the Holocaust tell their story. But you can now, and you could tell these stories to your children. Many people here, at some point, will be called on to make moral decisions where our actions will count and where we could have a profound impact on others' lives. Some people will tell you that you could never change the world. You could never end genocide. It's beyond us to fix what's broken in society. We don't believe that at Tufts. We believe that education can and should move us to action, and that engaged citizens can and will raise a moral voice and rise to moral action in our lives. So we're going to begin our program tonight with a short segment of a film taken from the documentary Genocide, produced by the Simon Wiesenthal Center. We decided to begin the talk with this 10-minute segment of film, both to make the transition to Mr. Ayolon's talk, and also to bring us back visually to a time when too few did too little to stop evil from happening. After the short film, Tufts Jr. Hilary Sieber will formally introduce Mr. Ayolon, and after Mr. Ayolon's talk, he's agreed to take questions. Thank you so much for being here this evening.
Nazi followers lost no time in carrying out their anti-Semitic program. Starting in April 1933, anyone with Jewish parents, or even with a single Jewish grandparent, was defined as a non-Aryan. German doctors, dentists, lawyers, architects, professors, actors, and musicians who happened to be Jews could no longer work with their fellow Aryans. Worse, concentration camps were set up. As early as March 1933, the Nazis opened Dachau concentration camp a few miles from Munich and immediately filled it with their German opponents, social democrats, communists, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, prominent Jews, and those who opposed their regime. Special notices declared, whoever buys from a Jew is a traitor to his people. Yet those same Jews had fought bravely in the First World War in the ranks of the German army. They'd been a part of German life for more than 1,000 years. They had contributed immensely to the development of German science, German technology, above all, German medicine. Books were burned. Some of the finest German music was banned. Intellect rots the character, Himmler told the Germans. Goering said, when I hear the word culture, I reach for my gun.
Das Zeitalter eines überspitzten jüdischen Intellektualismus ist nun zu Ende.
Now the German youth sang a new song. When Jewish blood spurts from the knife, then all goes twice as well. Throughout Germany, school children were taught that the Jewish people in their midst were the worst of all enemies. All the power of the state lent itself to this task. School books were published, filled with crude, anti-Jewish cartoons. A special children's board game was produced entitled Juden raus, Jews out. The instructions read, if you manage to kick out 6 Jews, you are the winner without question. What children played, adults acted. Boycotts, beatings, warnings not to buy Jewish goods, punishments for having a Jewish boyfriend or girlfriend, led in 1935 to a competition among towns and villages to drive out their Jews altogether, to declare themselves Jew-free. The success of this campaign was witnessed by a Dutch motorcyclist who, driving across Germany, recorded with his camera the seemingly endless placards and town signs. On July 31st, 1941, Goering had ordered Heydrich to begin the preparations for the final solution of the Jewish question. 6 months later, on January 20th, 1942, 15 high-ranking German officials met in the Berlin suburb of Wannsee to implement it. 8 of them were PhDs. It was Heydrich who addressed them. The Jews, he said, should first be separated by sex so that no more Jewish children would be born. Once separated, they should be put to work in labor columns where, he explained, doubtless a large part will fall away through natural reduction. The survivors, he said, the inevitable final remainder, would have to be dealt with appropriately to prevent them from becoming what he called the germ cell of a new Jewish development. The arrangements, he explained, would be coordinated by Eichmann. Eichmann would say about the meeting, I can't remember in detail, but they spoke about methods of killing, about liquidation, about extermination. In the second part, everyone spoke out of turn. People would go around, butlers, adjutants, and would give out liquor. The Wannsee Conference over, plans went ahead with the establishment of a massive concentration camp complex at Auschwitz-Birkenau, to which Jews from all over Europe would be sent. At Treblinka, the commandant had a facade of a railway station erected to deceive the victims. At Auschwitz, arrivals were greeted by an orchestra. A completely new use of the German language was devised to create a sense of security. Deportation had become resettlement. Selection for death had become special treatment. Gas chambers had become showers. Whole Jewish communities were told that they were being sent to new regions to become farmers or to work on some project essential for Germany. Some were made to pay for their tickets. Others had the price of their tickets deducted from the value of their confiscated property. Everything was done to lull them into a sense of security, or at least of hope. The deportations to Auschwitz began 3 weeks after those to Belzec. From as far west as France, from as far north as Norway, from as far south as Greece, the trains bearing their human cargo converged on Auschwitz. For 2, 3, 4, or 5 days, sometimes for as long as 2 weeks, these trains crossed Europe on the way to the gas chambers.
A young German engineer, Kurt Gerstein, who witnessed the gassing at Belzec, later described the actions of the SS commandant, Christian Wirth, and his victims. As the Jews were driven from the trains, they went through a portal inscribed with the Hebrew inscription, "This is the gate of the Lord, into which the righteous shall enter." Gerstein wrote of what he saw. A Jewess of about 40, with eyes like fire, curses the murderers. Wirth, an SS officer, himself strikes her across the face several times with a whip as she disappears into the gas chamber. Many pray. The SS men squeeze people into the chambers. "Fill them up well," orders Wirth. About 700 to 800 people in an area of 93 square meters. The doors close, but the diesel engine is not functioning. 50 minutes pass by, 70 minutes. The people in the death chambers remain standing. Their weeping is heard. SS Sturmbannführer Dr. Fennenstahl, lecturer in hygiene at Marburg University, remarks, "Just like a synagogue."
In the meantime, knowledge of the death camps had reached the West. But this news was treated almost as if it was insignificant. Thus, on July 2nd, 1942, the New York Times carried on page 6 a report stating that more than 1 million Jews had been exterminated. While on page 1 of the same issue, the Times story gave greater coverage of Governor Lehman's tennis shoe, which was given to the scrap rubber drive. By the end of 1944, a further 4 million had perished at Chelmno, Auschwitz, Sobibor, Belzec, Treblinka, and Majdanek. No country wanted them. Even the countries of which they were citizens would not protect them. Their only crime? They were Jews. There was no state of Israel then. More than 1/3 of the Jewish people were murdered. As the Red Army approached Auschwitz at the end of January 1945, the camp was evacuated. Among the emaciated people sent westwards was Anne Frank, who was taken to Belsen. There she perished at the age of 16. The first camp to be reached by the Western Allies, Ohrdruf, was liberated on the 4th of April 1945 by the United States 4th Armored Division. General Eisenhower was so shocked by what he saw that he sent photographs of the camp to Churchill and asked for a dozen leaders of Congress and a dozen prominent newspaper editors to fly at once to Europe to see the camps for themselves. Alongside the Jews had died other victims of Nazi atrocities: gypsies, homosexuals, political prisoners from every nation in Europe, including 60,000 Germans. The Nazis made strenuous efforts to conceal their crimes, but there were too many suitcases, shoes, shaving brushes, wedding rings, spectacles, children's clothes, dolls, and prayer shawls.
This is what the Germans did. Let there be no mistake about it, did deliberately and slowly, to doctors, authors, lawyers, musicians, to professional people of every kind, whom they've turned into animals behind the wire of their cage. This day at Belsen was the most horrible of my life. I saw it all. The furnace where thousands of people have been burned alive, only stunned before they were packed 3 at a time into the flames. The pit, 15 feet deep and as big as a tennis court, piled to the top at one end with naked bodies. The British bulldozer digging a new pit for the hundreds of bodies lying all over the camp, days after death, untouched and unburied.
What could a Christian understand by such terrible sights? It was the German Protestant theologian pastor Martin Niemöller who said as a Christian, "When they came for the Jews, I was not a Jew, so I did not protest. When they came for trade unionists, I did not belong to the trade union. When they came for Catholics, I was not a Catholic. When they came for me, there was no one left to protest."
Although many of the images from that video were very hard to see, we are so lucky to have Mr. Ayolon here with us tonight to give his personal account of the atrocities of the Holocaust. To begin, my name is Hillary Sieber, and I am a junior at Tufts University. I was fortunate enough to have traveled twice with Tufts Hillel to the Agahazo Shalom Youth Village, built in Rwanda for the youth orphaned from the 1994 genocide. The Agahazo Shalom Youth Village provides these students not only with a phenomenal education, but with a home, a family, and a bright future. While at the village, we Tufts students found so many similarities between the Rwandan students and ourselves. Yet their strength and sadness were visible deep below their smiling faces. Meeting with them brought to life the tragic stories we had read about in class, just as hearing personal accounts of the Holocaust illuminate the darkest periods in this history. Our guide at the Rwandan Genocide Museum shared with us that being a survivor is a big responsibility. These students and their fellow survivors stand today as a powerful voice for the future of Rwanda. Now we, as Tufts students, too feel this responsibility to share their history. And that is why we are here today. Through a generous donation from the Cummings family, we have been given the opportunity to once again hear a story of suffering and survival. I have the honor and the privilege of welcoming Mr. Ayolon to Tufts University. Mr. Ayolon was born in Radom, Poland, where his family was later incarcerated in the city's ghetto. In 1942, when the ghetto was liquidated, Mr. Ayolon was the only member of his family to escape murder at the Treblinka death camps. After surviving several more camps and a death march in 1945, Mr. Ayolon made his way to Israel as part of a youth Aliyah movement which cared for orphans of the Holocaust, addressing many of the same issues that Agahazo Shalom addresses today. For the last 20 years, Mr. Ayolon has been telling his story at Yad Vashem in Israel, in Poland, and around the world. As an educator, Mr. Ayolon, you are bestowing upon us a message for the future and for future generations. Your story of sadness, strength, and renewal will live on in us and all those you have touched. We are so blessed to have you here with us today. I would also like to thank Mr. and Mrs. Cummings for their generosity and kindness. We know that Mr. Ayolon lit a spark within you, and we hope that the students and members of the community here with us today will feel that same ignition of compassion and responsibility. We are honored to have you here with us tonight, and without further ado, I would like to welcome Eliezer Ayolon.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends in Boston. It is gratifying to see so many young people with us today. I only hope that you, the coming generation of this country, will take to heart my words and my message in your decision that you're going to make in the future. I came here to Boston from Jerusalem to deliver a message and to tell my personal story, the miraculous survival during the Holocaust, unfortunately the only one from my family. A story of a young Jewish boy who lived with his family in central Poland, in Radom, 2 brothers and a sister. I was the youngest. I had a joyful life prior to the Holocaust. I was brought up in a Jewish, religious and traditional home. I had a wonderful life. I remember 2 months before the German invaded my hometown, Radom. It was July and August. School vacation, I was to enter about the 6th grade. But I knew that the schools would be closed, there would be no more to see my friends there. But one thing I do remember, the last 2 months before the Germans came in, I belonged to a choir of a synagogue in Radom. I was singing with my 2 brothers. And the cantor and the rabbi of the synagogue insisted that we should continue our rehearsals. Knowing that the Germans are coming in, was hoping that we will be able to continue our prayers, but never again. I remember the day when the Germans came into my hometown. It was Friday, the 8th of September, 1939. 11 o'clock in the morning, a curfew, explosions, shooting in the German troops with their armored cars and tanks are moving in the streets of Radom. No one went out to see who these people are. But the following day, on Saturday, instead of going to the synagogue with my father, I decided to join a group of children of my age. I was 11 years old. And we decided to go into the streets of Radom and to see who are those soldiers who came in the day before. And as I approached this group of soldiers parking with their armored cars, one of the German soldiers came out with a half loaf of black bread in his head and was about to give out us children. We were about 10. But before that, he asked a question in the German language. Now, we didn't speak German, but we understood what he was referring to. And the question was, Jude? Jews? Are you Jews? And we, yes. And at that moment, that German soldier began to shout at us and expelled us from the street and out and began to curse us. And I ran home with tears in my eyes. And I asked my mother, why do they hate us? I didn't have to wait for the answer. A couple of weeks passed, and I knew the answers. During the first few weeks of the occupation, the German authorities issued a number of decrees against the Jewish community in my hometown. There were 30,000 Jews with 150,000 Poles. And the decrees were every Jew from the age of 10 must wear a white armband with a blue star of David. The Jews are forbidden to go into theaters, to movie houses. A Jew must remove his head in the streets when a German soldier passes him. But the worst of the decrees was that the Jews would not be allowed to attend religious services in the synagogue. It was the season of the high holidays coming. Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, the Day of Atonement. Our community in Rotterdam decided to defy this decree, and we did organize religious services in our basements, hiding places, and we, the children, were watching outside to make sure that the Germans will not discover a group of Jews praying in the synagogue. With all this situation, my family could handle, like the other Jews did, as long as I could live together as the family, to sleep in my bed, to eat my meals, and singing songs and sharing our happiness and suffer together. It was not bad. This little apartment, our home, bound us. It was safe and warm. But the worst came just 7 months later. The Germans decided to establish a Jewish ghetto in Rotterdam for the 30,000 Jews. I never heard this word ghetto before. I didn't know what it meant. But a few weeks passed and I learned about it. It was sure that I will have to leave my home. It became apparent that I will have to leave my home where I was born and raised. I never knew another home since I was born. The German gave us 1 month's time. We have to pack some of our belongings and to move out into an area which was designated to become the ghetto for the 30,000 Jews. Obviously, the Germans couldn't find one place to accommodate all the 30,000, so they split us into two groups. There was a small ghetto of 8,000 and a large one of 22,000. My family moved into the large ghetto. That is exactly when my life changed dramatically. To live in a ghetto means to live in a prison, an open prison, a wall surrounding the ghetto with barbed wire fences, with guards, overcrowded, a poor and slum neighborhood in which 7,000 Poles had previously lived, and now 22,000 are moving in. The Germans viewed the ghettos as a transitional measure until time comes to liquidate the ghettos and to deport the Jews to death camps. Life in a ghetto oscillated between the desperate struggle of survival and death from starvation. I remember days when my family could not afford to buy more than a half loaf of bread each day. The source of income was the problem. My father had a small workshop for cutting leather for making shoes, but living in a ghetto, we were cut off from a total population at large, and this prevented us from coming into contact with the Poles. Jews had some money from the beginning, or jewelry, so they could buy some more food. There was smuggling food into the ghetto. And I remember there's a motto of the smugglers: eat and drink because tomorrow we die. A half loaf of bread for 6 people. And I remember how my father cut 6 portions of bread. This was the only meal I ate. Sometimes my mother made a soup of some potatoes or onions, and I was hungry all the time, but never complained. Never complained. I got used not to eat. The Germans practiced in the ghetto what sociologists would call clean violence, death by starvation. The only way that could improve your chances to survive in a ghetto was if you could find a job somewhere, if you became employed by the Germans, if you had some skills, and they needed our skills. If you were a professional carpenter, a shoemaker, a tailor, you could find a job. And I remember the day when I heard about opening a job outside the ghetto. First of all, in every ghetto there was a Jewish council. The Germans were smart. From the first week when they came into a Jewish community, they made sure to establish a Jewish council. And that Jewish council was forced to carry out all the demands of the Germans, to carry out the orders. But they also needed us to work for them. So I remember a job was opening in a German supply base of uniforms and boots and helmets outside the ghetto. The Jewish Council published this request and said, we need 100 workers from the age of 15 above to work a week outside the ghetto, 6 days out of the ghetto. Sunday's a day off. You can come back to the ghetto to spend the day with your families. When I heard about this job opening, I determined to figure out a way how to get it. But I had a problem, like many children of my age. The German policy was not to employ children under the age of 15, and I was only 13 years old. But children knew what to do. Luckily, we learned that the Germans do not ask a birth record. If you make a good impression when you appear before a German work supervisor who came to register you, the chances were that you could find a job. And on that very day, about 2,000 people came for that job. 100 people were needed. And I was there too. There were not many children of my age. The German supervisor comes in and he takes the names. And when he noticed that I'm that little boy running around, he approached me, how old are you? And I was trembling. But I stood stiffly and shouted, 15, so convincingly that he had no doubt that I'm younger than they said. Over there, it means I got the job. I was accepted. And I ran over to the group, and the same day, I was 4 miles outside the ghetto in a huge storage warehouse in a German military base, piled up with uniforms, boots, and helmets. Trains came in. We had to unload the trains and then sort out the uniforms. And 6 days, from Monday till Saturday, I worked in that camp. And the commander of that clothing department liked me because I was energetic, efficient, and punctual. And I became a permanent worker in the school because many workers were sent back to the ghetto. They didn't work good enough. I was so happy that I have a job, and they also paid me a small amount of money. But the most important thing was that the Germans provided us with a lunch every day. And of course, accommodation. These were not real Nazis. They were elderly soldiers who couldn't be sent to the battlefield, so they were serving the German army. And I was happy. Every Sunday I came home, my pockets were packed with food that I could buy and smuggle into the ghetto. My family was happy, and I was happy. Until the summer of 1942. August 1942. That was the month that I will never forget in my life. Rumors began to spread in the ghetto, falling with alarming information that the Germans are planning to liquidate the ghetto and to send the Jews for a resettlement into the east. Panic spread everywhere. And then there was a Sunday. See, the summer of 1942, it's important for you to know, in the summer of 1942, all over Poland, the Germans decided to implement the final solution to the Jewish question. And in July 1942, there were 6 extermination camps on the soil of Poland. Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Chełmno, Auschwitz, Birkenau, Majdanek. And within 6 months, all the ghettos in Poland were emptied, and the Jews were sent. Resettlement, this was the term that the Germans used to make us believe that the Jews are being sent to labor camps. Not to worry, they will work, children will be even educated. Just fill out orders and report on that day to the train stations. That was on a Sunday when the rumors came into the ghetto with announcements. There was a Jewish police force in the ghetto warning us not to try to escape because there were many Germans machine gun outside it. And among this whole tumult and excitement, there was one announcement that said that those residents of the ghetto who possess labor cards, work permits, like I had, being employed in the German base, should leave the ghetto before darkness begins to fall. And it was only me in the family who had that piece of paper. The Germans provided us with that working pass. I was a protected worker, and I could leave the ghetto outside, and I won't be included in the list to be sent to the resettlement. But when I heard about this announcement, I came home and I said, I am not going back to that base. I'm staying here. Whatever happens to you will happen to me. I refuse to leave home. And here begins a drama in my home, 2 hours of argument. I begged my family. I cried, let me stay. I want to stay with you. My mother insisted that I should go back. She approached me every few minutes and put her hand on my shoulder and said, you have to go back. You risk your job if you stay with us. You are the only support of the family. You're bringing us food every week. Go back. Don't worry about us. But I didn't want to listen to that. But after 2 hours, my argument did not convince anyone in the family that I should stay. I agreed. My mother prepared for me a little bag. And I remember this afternoon, I picked up this bag, and my mother followed me outside. He said, I'm going to go with you to the ghetto exit gate. I want to make sure that you're going back to that base. And as we stepped outside, I noticed that my mother was trying to hide something under her scarf she was wearing, but I didn't pay attention. All what I wanted is to, if I could only stop the clock, I wanted to do the time to slow so I can stay a little bit more with my mother. I knew that if I will be outside the gate, I will never see my mother again. And as we walked the 7 minutes from my home into the ghetto exit gate, I tried again to ask my mother, maybe she will change her mind and let me stay. But my mother pleaded with me, and she admitted for the first time that we might become separated. My mother's words were soothing. She had this magical way how to make the hurt and the pain fade away. And as we approached the ghetto exit gate, she said, wait a minute, she said to me. And then she turned to me and said, Eliezer, this is the way she used to call me. If there is anyone in the family with a chance to survive, it is you. You will survive. You will have a sweet life because it is meant to be. She was using this Jewish word, besheert, meaning meant to be, a very common word among the European Jews. It is meant to be. I was looking into her brown eyes and I couldn't believe, why me? Don't ask questions, she says to me. And saying these words to me, she handed me something that she had been carrying under her scarf, a white porcelain cup covered with a piece of cloth on top, secured with a string. And she said to me, take this cup with you. You will have a sweet life. And again, she repeated the words she was saying to me. And I protested, I don't need anything. No, she said, you'll take this cup. I saw in her eyes that my mother meant for me to have this cup. But I wanted to see what is inside that cup. So I moved the string on the side, and I was shocked. Of all things, the cup was full of honey. Honey. I hadn't seen honey for a long time. Where did my mother get the honey? I don't know to this very day. I took that cup, hugged my mother, and left the ghetto. My pass was valid. Outside there were about 200 people with work permits. They all walked back to the base 4 miles away. And on that very night, the ghetto with the 20,000 Jews, including my family, were sent to Treblinka, the largest death camp in Poland. I never heard this name before. We had to continue our work in that base every day in the morning. We were trying to get some information. What happened to the families? Where did the Germans send them? But only 2 weeks later, the Poles that worked with us in that base told us the bitter truth. Treblinka is a death camp. There are gas chambers and crematorium, and all the Jews from Radom are dead. And we discounted all this information because we didn't want to believe that our families are dead. They were dead. We were the only 100 workers of Radom who survived the deportation because we were protected by the Germans in that base. 1 week passed, and we asked the German authorities of the base to allow us to return to the ghetto to pick up some more of our belongings from our homes. And permission was granted. They provided us with a truck, and 2 German guards will give you a few hours, but you have to come back in the afternoon, 4 o'clock. And as I walked into the ghetto, I saw people walking, people that I knew, Radomer people. What happened? We are here. We survived the selection. That night before they were pushed like sheep into their boxcars, there was a selection, and close to 1,000 people were selected to stay and to clean the spoils in the ghetto. I ran to my home without a breath, and in that little home that we lived in a ghetto, that room, I found my father and one of my brothers who survived the selection, and they were part of my family. I said, "What are you doing here? Come with me back to the base." I could have taken them. No. My father believed that my mother and the rest of the family will come back soon. I had to leave the ghetto to go back to the base. I was in contact with my father and my brother until January of 1943, when all the survivors of that ghetto were sent to Treblinka, and then we know for sure that I am alone. I know like the other 100 workers knew. The German authority of that camp wouldn't keep us forever as protected workers because orders came in from Berlin that Jews are not supposed to work in a German military installation. And the order was to transfer us into a concentration and forced labor camp, 80 miles away. This was the first concentration camp out of the 5. We left with all our belongings, with trucks, and when I came into this camp, which had a very, very bad reputation in Poland, there were about 8,000 inmates, many of them from Radom, my hometown. Shoemakers, tailors, carpenters, metalworkers, electricians. The moment we walked in through the gate, the guards were pushing us to the roll call. The first thing when you come to a new camp, there's a roll call. We had to put all our belongings onto the ground for inspection. And then we were sent into our barracks. And then I met with people of that camp. Strange-looking people wearing oversized clothing with the eyes were hollow, emaciated faces, a string or a belt to which was attached a tin ball with a spoon, wearing wooden cloaks. So what are you doing here? We're working. There's a shoemaking workshop, tailors in it. Tell them that you are a shoemaker or you have a profession. Otherwise, you will work outside in stone quarries. And I decided that I'm going to be a shoemaker. I will learn how to make a pair of wooden clocks. This camp made thousands of wooden clocks for the Russian prisoners of war. And I was accepted at workshop. Within 3 days, I learned how to make a pair of shoes. And my product became a model for the workshop. I was performing well, and I was happy. I have a cover above my head, and somehow I'll try to survive. But it wasn't that easy. That camp was not only a concentration camp, but a slave labor camp. People died every day from exhaustion, from diseases, because the Germans did not give us enough food. The daily life began 5 o'clock in the morning, a wake-up call. You have 20 minutes time to jump out of your bunk. I was sleeping with 6 people on a bunk, 1 blanket, and a thin layer of a straw mattress, but always with that bowl of soup under my head. 20 minutes time to make your bed, to fold your blanket, and then you have to form a line to get your breakfast in the morning. And the breakfast was just a cup of water, brown cold water with tea or coffee. And then again, you have to run to the roll call, counting parade of the prisoner twice a day. And you have to stand there about an hour or 2 hours until the counting is over. Then you are marching to your work. 12 o'clock, a whistle is sounded. In every camp, the same routine. Lunch is being served, so you ran out to stand in a line behind a kettle of soup, 50 people behind a kettle. And you have to place your bowl next to the edge and make sure that not a single drop will spill outside. But the lunch was just a half a gallon of water, a watery soup that contained maybe 1 or 2 potato skins. And if you found one of the potatoes, and you were the happiest person. After lunch, you have to go back to work until 6 o'clock. Then comes dinner. Dinner is a chunk of bread, 180 grams. 6 inmates divided 1 loaf of bread among the 6. And I remember I couldn't wait to even just the first piece of bread that I ate every day. I was watching with hungry eyes, what part of the bread will I get today? The middle part or the edge? No one liked the edge. It was always smaller than the middle part. So one day I got a middle part, and the other day I got the edge, 180 grams. I remember the different techniques that I tried to adopt in order to not think about my hunger. You know, I was keeping my mind busy all the time. Different techniques to relieve my hunger for a few moments at a time. And I began to talk to myself. I became my own storyteller. I imagined all kinds of stories, fantasies, that the war is coming to an end and I will come home and I will see the family. I didn't have friends in that camp because they were not children over there, maybe 5 or 6. I didn't trust anyone. That winter of 1943 was the most horrible time in that camp. People died during the night, freezing, diseases, and I could stand on my feet. I had this tremendous feeling of willpower, not only in this camp, even in the other camps. That willpower to remain on the side of the living. I refused to die. I did everything possible to survive. Selections for transfer inmates from one camp to the other were daily, weekly occurred very often. This was the policy of the Germans, to move workers from one camp because another camp needed some 100 workers, shoemakers or tailors. Before you were transferred to another camp, you had to pass a selection in the morning after the roll call. Rumors of upcoming selection were always chilling because we knew that some of us will be sent to die. A selection means that you have to stand in front of a Nazi physician that first of all hated you. And it not always matter whether you are a productive worker. It depended how you would appear before that physician. You had to remove your jacket and to show him your body how you look like. And he would decide whether you should live or not. He would notify you in a split second with a flick of his thumb. Left, right, without saying a single word. And when my turn came, with every step I took, I whispered a prayer to God to make this Nazi physician turn his thumb in the direction of the spared. As I observed the selection process, I knew that the weak and the sick people who are limping and approaching weakly, they stood less of a chance. But instead, if you show that you are strong and alert, so I approached this physician and stood stiffly at attention, removed my jacket and shouted, "Shoemaker!" Schuster in German. And within a split second, his thumb moved in the direction of the living, and I darted like a rabbit, thanking God that my prayers had been answered. I was among those who will be transferred into another camp, and I don't know which one and where it is. The same day, I was already in the camp number 2, still in Poland, Plaszów. Maybe this name rings a bell to some of you, those who watched the movie of Steven Spielberg, Schindler's List. That was the second camp, a Nazi concentration camp with a big sign at the entrance saying in the German language, Konzentrationszwangslager, with an emblem of a skull and 2 crossbones. That was a murderous unit of the Nazi army. SS was the emblem. And I'm entering into this camp with about 6,000. First thing, you go to a roll call. Again, put everything on the ground. Disinfection, showers, and then you go to your barrack. Instructions, the couples are coming and telling us about the rules of this camp, and if you disobey an order, you are dead. And in that very camp was this particular cruel and sadist murderer, Amon Geth. And I remember his favorite method of torture. He used to walk in the streets of that camp, or sometimes riding on a white horse, and motion with his left hand index finger, just like that, for an inmate to approach. And when an inmate approached him, he asked a question. Without waiting for the answer, he pulled out a gun and shot him right in his head. Killing in this camp was sport. To come in contact with the guards resulted in that. And I tried not to walk on the same street. What did I do in this camp? I was sent into a workshop, not for shoes, but I repaired side bags of the German soldiers, or repairing saddles for horses. There were a lot of riding horses, and so I was happy. I will not have to come in contact with the guards outside. This was a horrible place for me, sleeping on the same bunk with 6, 7 people. And in this camp, I was a witness of an execution of a young boy of my age, 15 years old or something. A Jewish boy who was caught stealing 2 potatoes from the kitchen in the camp. And he was punished to be executed in front of 18,000 inmates. It was in a morning roll call. I was standing in the line. On that very day, I happened to stand on the first column of 250 people. Always before we reached the roll call, I maneuvered to be behind, not always in front to watch the punishments, but on that very day I stood right in front. And 5 minutes afterwards, I heard a boy crying and begging for his life. He was dragged by 2 Ukrainian guards, and he was put on a execution hill just in front of me, tied to a pole with ropes around his body. And he was begging, let me stay, let me go. And a few minutes later, Amon Geth himself, this murderer, came riding on his white horse with 2 dogs, huge dogs, running around him. He dismounted from his horse and approached the boy and asked him some questions I couldn't hear. I was very close, but I couldn't hear. But then he backed up and he whistled for the dogs. And the dogs came running to him. And then I remember he pointed out with his hand to the direction of that boy and shouted to the dogs to attack that boy. And the dogs began to run. And within a few minutes, this boy was torn into pieces until he stopped crying. And I was supposed to look straight ahead, this horrible scene, so I couldn't. I closed my eyes and looked down to the ground. 2 minutes later, I felt a stick under my chin. There was a couple, one of the internal police, running towards me and forced me to look straight ahead. I had to look what is happening. This horrible scene pursued me until August of that year, 1944, until I was sent out of Poland to a 3rd camp. This was Austria. And the camp name was Mauthausen. Maybe some of you have heard. One of the largest and most notorious camps in Austria, Mauthausen. This camp had about 50 sub-camps, satellite camps. Stone quarries, digging tunnels in the mountains of Austria. They don't need shoemakers, no tailors. And I was assigned to a group to work in shifts. We were working 8 hours in shifts around the clock, but for a very short period of time, because orders came to transfer again. But before I was transferred, I became an official prisoner in this camp. When you come into that camp, they would register you and measure your height, the color of eyes, the color of hair, a registration card. I was given this stripped uniform, and at the very end, a name, a new name. And the name was, this was my name, 84991. A piece of cotton sewn to the jacket, and one of them on the trousers. And in addition to that number, the prisoners were also labeled by different colors of triangle according to the crime they had committed. A Jew had 2 triangles. All the others had only 1. And each color told you what you did. Black, a murderer. Green was a criminal. Pink was a homosexual. A Jew had 2 different colored triangles. One was yellow, meaning that I'm a Jew. And on the top came the red colored triangle. I was a Jewish political prisoner, 16 years old. When I was given this number, I felt that I'm really dehumanized. Before that, they didn't give us out numbers. In the 2 former camps, they just painted our jackets with a yellow stripe, Jew. But here I am a prisoner. I'm not a human being, a number. When I was given this number, the veteran inmates in this camp warned me and said, you have to remember your number every minute of the day. I said, why? Because guards in this camp are getting drunk very often, and they would walk in a camp in the streets, approach an inmate, and put the hand on the number, covered it, and he asked, what is your name? Not always did the inmate remember to call out the digits of the number. And if he made a mistake, he was told, if you don't remember your name, that means that you are not supposed to be among the living people, and he was beaten to death. I had to repeat this number every minute of the day. working from 6 o'clock in the morning until 1, and then from 1 till 7, or from 7 to 12 o'clock in tunnels, shifting sand from one side to the other. The food was even worse than in the first 2 camps. And then comes another order. You're going to be transferred deeper into the mountains of Austria. They need thousands of workers to dig tunnels for the passages of trains. It was the end of 1944. The Germans were on the run because Russia already liberated some places in Poland. The Russian army was advancing to Poland. The Allied forces were moving from the west towards Germany, and the order was to dismantle this camp and to move with all the inmates, those who can stand on their feet. So I found myself in camp number 4. That was Melk, a beautiful village in the mountains. The same type of work in tunnels, winter of 1944 and 45. I was there until April 1945, a month before I was liberated by the American forces. This was one of the most horrible, horrible places. And I couldn't wait for the day to be transferred. And the day came. It was the last week of April. How do we go to the other camp? There were no transportation. We marched. It was a death march for 2.5 days, marching in columns of 5 people with interlocked arms, guarded on both sides with heavy guards. And those who cannot keep up with the rhythm, if you stumble or left behind, they would say to you, sit down and rest. But after a few minutes, as the column proceeded, you could hear a shot, and you know that that person will rest forever. They just shot him to death. And the bodies were thrown into rivers. But the column had to continue walking and walking after 2.5 days. I don't know how I could stand on my feet until I reached the last camp. That was Ebense, in the mountains of Austria. 18,000 inmates, skeletons, were in this camp. The Germans reduced our food ration every day. They themselves didn't have enough food. I remember this, the last week of April, people dying every day at the rate of 200, 300 people. But in that camp, and even in the 2 previous camps, there were crematoriums and gas chambers, which I didn't see in Poland. We knew that the Germans are burning bodies, but I was never so close. And in these camps, I could feel the stench at night, and I could see the chimney pouring out a dark smoke. I remember the last week, I was in a state of protracted starvation. I could count my ribs. I could touch my ribs on both sides under the skin. And every day in the morning when I got up, I used to check how much skin do I still have on my ribs. I was a walking skeleton, like the others. I will not give up. I had so much hope. I said, I will have to struggle and to continue into life. I was young. I said, maybe I will find a way how to overcome this misery. And here comes the day. It was a crisis in my life. Rumors reached us, the camp inmates, telling us that cooking salt, listen to that story, you never heard that before. Cooking salt is good for starving bodies. It's good to eat salt. Now, where can you get salt in a camp? You have to go into a kitchen and to ask for salt. If you do that, they will kill you right away. In that camp, there was an underground movement. Almost in every camp, there was like a mafia. And they were Russian prisoners of war. They developed a market. They opened a black market of selling little bags of salt for a half portion of your bread. And people decided if it's good to eat salt, so I'll give up a half portion of my bread and I will purchase this bag of salt. I didn't want to do that, but I watched others doing the salt like it was butter, and they began to feel good. They became thirsty, they drank a lot of liquid and water, and they filled some of their stomach. And so I decided I'm going to do that too. If it's good for them, maybe it will be good for me too. So one day I had to trade in with a half portion of bread, and I got this little bag of salt and began to spread the salt every day in the afternoon when I got this piece of bread. And it was okay. I was thirsty, I drank water, I was happy. But eating salt for 2 weeks or more, my body reacted with rage. My legs got swollen like a piece of dough. In the morning, I got up one day, and I couldn't put my feet into my wooden clock. And then I began to cry so bitterly. I said, this is the end. I felt that I was facing the end. I'm going to die. I watched others getting swollen like me. They died shortly afterwards. But in the end, I said, no, maybe I will survive. I'm still young. My mother's words were always here, that I will survive and I will have a sweet life. There was only one option left. And I decided one day, I am going to speak to my God, the Almighty, sitting over there. And he will have to listen to my prayer and to help me. See, when I was a little boy before the war, my parents sent me to a religious school in Radom. I was 6 years old. And I remember the rabbi taught us prayers. One of the most important prayers. Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, the basic prayers of a Jew, to express his faithfulness to God. And I said, I'm going to pray that every day in the morning and in the evening. So I got up in the morning, I put my blanket over my head and recited Shema Yisrael, the prayer to God. The same thing in the evening before I went to sleep on my bunk. After 10 days, I decided not to eat salt anymore. I still had a little bit of salt, and I decided to throw it away. No more salt. And the swelling disappeared. And I could put my feet into my... And I was wondering, was it really God's intervention, or was it the prayers? I don't know. I came back to normal. The last week of April, the beginning of May 1945. Every night, I remember lying on a bunk, I could hear explosions coming closer and closer. And I could hear the sound of airplanes flying overhead every day. I know that these are pilots of the Allied forces. And I remember sometimes we were trying to shout to the pilot, drop the bombs, destroy the camp. They wouldn't listen to us. The Germans decided not to send us to work in the tunnels because every day there was bombardment, drops, bombs, and everywhere. They said, you stay in the barracks on your bunks. And during the first week of May, many of the guards of this camp deserted their position. There were no more machine guns in the watchtowers, I remember. The guards of the camp were not soldiers, but guards from the community, from the civil guards, civilians. And we felt that something is going to happen. We were warned by the capos, by the police, not to try to escape. And then we heard news coming from outside that the Germans are dropping guns and they're running away into Germany. But none of us could move. We were skeletons. None of us attempted to escape. And we waited every day that something is going to happen. And that day came. It was the 6th of May, 1945, a Monday morning. 13,000 of inmates are lying almost on the ground. The last roll call, the commander of the camp gave an order that we should go out for the roll call. Imagine 13,000 people 2,000 already died 2 months before, but we couldn't walk, so people decided just to sit on the ground. And as we stood there or lying on the ground, the German commander of this camp climbs a wooden table and he delivers a speech through a megaphone telling us for the first time he admitted that the war is coming to the end. The Allied force, the American forces are coming, but the German army, he said, is still here. It's going to be a tank battle, and you might get hurt. So he suggested that we should go into shelters, into the tunnels that we were digging. And we will be safe, and then maybe we will be free to go. The war is coming to an end. But we knew what he was actually planning to do. His intention was to destroy the entire camp with the inmates, as it happened in other camps. Came orders from Berlin not to leave evidence of the crime, to obliterate all the traces of crime and to kill the inmates wherever they can. Not to leave a living soul falling into the hands of the liberators. Now, the mafia of that camp all of a sudden were on outside, and they prepared us in case that such order will be implemented, and we all refused to go into the tunnels. Imagine 13,000 people out shouting, no! It was the commander and a few of his staff with helmets and machine guns across the street. We refused to carry out this order, and all of us stood on that ground. If he wants to kill some of us, let him do it. And to our great surprise, that commander with his staff left the crowd, went into the forest, jumped into the motorcycles, and disappeared, and we are alone with no guards. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. 3 hours later, 11 o'clock, I could hear a heavy sound of cars, tanks, approaching the forest. This camp was located in a forest. And it took about a few minutes. All of a sudden, I saw a beige-colored tank burst through the main gate of the camp, and behind him, a second tank, another 3 tanks. The turrets are shut. There's no one outside. And the tank moves and circles around 30,000 skeletons lying on the ground. And then they stop, one of them not far where I was sitting. The turret opens, and from each tank there are 4 men with huge helmets on the head, came out, and for a second, there was such a silence all of a sudden, and then comes the shouting, the American are here, the American, and we began to hug one another and to smile and to cry. Those who could approach these soldiers, and were approaching, and we wanted to touch if they are human beings. And these tanks became mountains of skeletons. But to me, they were not American soldiers. To me, they were angels that came down from heaven to save my life. That's what I saw. So if they are angels, I said to myself they should have wings, and I'm going to check where the wings are. I just didn't have enough strength to approach the soldiers, so I stood there and still couldn't believe that it was actually happening because the shouting came out. So I stood there and pinched my arms and my cheek to make sure that this is not a dream, that I'm alive. And it was real. These were American soldiers of General George Patton's army. And by the way, one of these soldiers who came in to liberate my camp, I met this last May in Detroit. An American Jew, 86 years old, came to see me. I wanted to see him. I wanted to know what he saw when he came in to that camp and saw so many skeletons. So I had a chance to meet with that American soldier who was still alive in Detroit. But look what happened. The only contact between us and the soldiers was this. We wanted food because the last day the Germans did not feed us. And I remember how the American soldiers emptied their pockets and threw out everything. Cigarettes and chewing gum and biscuits. The food came in later. Trucks loaded with loaves of bread and cooked meals and so much food. But there was no way to control a starving crowd. People didn't stand in line to wait until they would get a portion of bread. They attacked the trucks and took one loaf of bread, two, and maybe three, and ran away like animals into the forest. And people started to eat and to eat. And they got sick and died after the liberation. They just exploded from too much food because they didn't have a stomach. If you don't eat for a long time, you don't have a stomach. Somehow, I was able to control myself. I ate a lot. I got sick like others. But to me, the liberation that came was not food. I remember days when people were pushing to be ahead of the line and get some more food. I was searching for something else, not food. I was searching for a toothbrush that I didn't use for 3 years. I wanted to find a pair of shoes. I wanted to find underwear, something that will make me feel that I am a human being and not a prisoner anymore. I said to myself, food is not going to liberate me. I have to do something to myself. I was not a human being. So I found a jacket of a German cook because I wanted to get rid of my uniform and remove my number. So I took this jacket. I removed the emblem of the Nazi army and I took it. I wore it for a while. At least the return to life was horrible. It was just as living in a camp. Food was not a problem. But where am I going to go? I never thought to go back to Poland. I knew that my family is dead. There were about 500 young prisoners. I was among the youngest. There were 4,000 Jews, and the others were prisoners of various nationalities. Many of them went back to Czechoslovakia, to Greece, to everywhere. The Jews remained there. But then I met the real angels. Still wingless angels, but to me they were really angels. These were soldiers of the British Army that came from Palestine, from the land of Israel. They joined the British Army, went to Europe, and they came to search for Jewish children. They came to this camp, which was like a DP camp, displaced persons camp. And they were searching for children. Now, how did I recognize, how do I identify that he's a Jewish soldier? They were all the same. A Jewish soldier had a little tag here with a flag, 2 blue stripes and a little Magen David, the Star of David. So we thought he must be a Jewish soldier. And we approached him, and we started to communicate in Yiddish, in Polish, different. They took us out from that camp, 400 children of my age. I was 17 years old, 55 pounds, that was me. I remember the Red Cross came in with ambulances, and everyone had to stand on it. How do you look like? And we measured. And out. I just want to leave this place. And they took us into Italy, southern Italy, and put us up in a huge DP camp. It was like a hotel, 5 meals a day. We got new clothing, showers, and then I felt that I'm coming back to life. It took me 6 months to recover. 2 of my friends died in that camp. They couldn't make it. In that camp, I was 6 months until November 1945. The next month, November 8 will be the 65th anniversary since I came into the land of Israel. And one day, the Jewish Brigade, who was still in charge of us, with the Jewish agencies and different Jewish organizations from America, the Jewish Distribution Committee, and they all send money to keep us alive. I could have gone to Australia, Canada, or America, but my heart was to go to Eretz Israel. I'm going to Palestine, to the land of my forefathers. And I said, I will wait, no matter how. The British military government in Palestine, they wouldn't let us in. Even Holocaust survivors could not come to that country. Many Jews were smuggled in the dilapidated vessels on the Mediterranean Sea. And when a ship of refugees, or we were all refugees, was caught by the British Navy, they were sent into detention camps to Cyprus or to other camps in Israel. And we were promised that we will get entrance visas to this country. So I was waiting and waiting until one day you have certificates, this is how they call it. And I was included to get this certificate. On the 8th of November 45, I'm reaching the shores of Haifa. It looked like heaven. I'm safe. I'm among Jewish people. I'm going to return to life. They send me to a school. I wanted to become a farmer, to till the soil of my homeland. I couldn't graduate because there was a war going on and a lot of problems. I will wait. I will go back to school later on. But in the meantime, I met a girl, a native one in Palestine. She was a nurse in a hospital, and we met somehow, and we decided to get married. I felt that I need a home. I need a family. Her parents adopted me as a son of the family, but this was not enough. I wanted to have a home of my own, and I said to that girl, would you like to marry me? I didn't have a ring. I didn't have money to buy a ring. So she said, yes, but when? I said, right now. Right now. It was May 1949, the beginning of May. Said, we are going to get married, and their parents agreed. There was a military wedding. I was still in the uniforms in the army. On the 17th of May 1945, we got married, and this last May we celebrated 62 years of our anniversary wedding. Thank you. I'm going to conclude the story and tell you the following. You see, I think that I accomplished everything that I wanted. I built a home in Israel. I have 2 married children, 5 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. 3 of them, actually. 3. Why 2? 3. My life is a continuing defeat to the Nazis, to Hitler, who planned to destroy the Jewish nation, but he never succeeded. I just want to add something to those who didn't listen to me at dinner time. When I came to the land of Israel in 1945, I did not speak about the Holocaust at all. For 37 years, I kept everything inside me. The Jewish community living in that country wasn't so interested in listening to my story. Only after 37 years, something happened in my life. I met a man, Eliezer. He made me to speak. And I started to tell my story, my personal story, and how I survived, and I was relieved and released. And this is what I'm doing to this very day. But there's one more thing that I want to do to the young generations sitting here. I wish to make an appeal to you today, a special appeal to you. Make sure that genocide never happens again. Speak out against racism, against baseless hatred. We have to speak and to make sure that the Holocaust will never happen again. If you do that, you will contribute a lot to this very good. We have seen how silence could kill. Now, after 65 years, the world must be vigilant and not silent. The silence could kill millions of people. And that is what I'm doing today. I'm speaking to people and making them to understand that we have to do the utmost to make sure that it will never happen again. Speak out against everything that you can. One more thing. See, every day in the morning when I get up, I still recite Shema Yisrael, still a prayer to God. I travel a lot to Poland with groups. I'm speaking to young people and to Jews and non-Jews. I dedicated my life because it is important for me. Not many survivors are able to speak. Many of them are in the 80s, maybe more. And I decided as long as I can stand on my feet, I will continue to do that. To speak and to remember, to remind people that it should never, never, ever happen again. And with this, I will conclude my story. And I want to thank you so much for your listening, for coming to see me and to listen to my story. I hope that my message will be transferred from you to the other generation. That is the most important thing that I hope to do. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.